Continuing on with Tell Them, and this is the next devotional called The Provider. Psalm 78:4 says, "We will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, His power, the wonders He has done." And why? So that the next generation will know them, even the children yet to be born, and they will in turn tell their children. So if we start this process of storytelling of His goodness in our lives, even the unborn children listening will hear. That's something to think about. And if we continue this process on a regular basis, then our children will tell their children. Why is this so important? Do our kids even want to hear our stories of deliverance? Sure they do, whether they know it or not. Kids love to hear and watch and enjoy films that have conflicts and wins. So think of the own movies that your kids love to watch where there's a villain, and then the villain is defeated by a strong and mighty warrior or victor. There's lots of them. Or what about the stories of a lost puppy or a girl sent to sweep cinders, or the tales of a team coming from behind? These all make for blockbusters at the theater, so why not tell your own true stories to your kids? Verse 7 tells us why we need to tell the stories to the kids, and it says so that they will put their trust in God and not forget His deeds, keep His commands, and not be like their ancestors, a stubborn and rebellious generation whose hearts were not loyal to God, whose spirits were not faithful to Him. If our kids hear our stories, they will be more apt to recall and remember them when they're tempted to forget God and His commands in their own lives, and they'll be able to turn away from being stubborn and rebellious. Too often we think our experiences are embarrassing or they're just our own private memories to store, but it's so not true. The generation before me often told me how they had nothing for Christmas, maybe got an apple and an orange. They worked hard, maybe they had no food on the table or they had to walk miles to school, but God always provided their hunger and thirst. They also told stories about fishing and catching nothing and about visiting the town square to play with friends, and I enjoyed hearing them. I doubt that many of us only get an orange for Christmas, but we have other stories to tell about our own childhood. We don't have to tell the kids in a way that criticizes them while they're listening, but rather with joy in remembering the goodness of God. My mom often told me how when I was 2 years old, I had a high fever and they were told to take me to the hospital, and the hospital wanted to keep me overnight, but my dad prayed and I was healed on the spot. Kids need to hear these stories, so when their own children are sick, their first response is to pray and not fear. A few verses later, it says the men forgot what the Lord had done and what He had shown them, and maybe the stories weren't being circulated anymore or fresh in their memories. And it says in the day of battle, these same men turned back and were not loyal to God, and they did not believe in His trust or His deliverance. That's a very sad state in which to leave our next generation, but it's where they will be if we don't tell them. Then the chapter recalls of all the provision God gave His children on that 40-year walk in the wilderness, including manna, that sweet bread from heaven. And in verse 42 it says they did not remember His power the day that He redeemed them from the oppressor. And what a sad day indeed when we no longer remember to recount the blessings of God in our lives. For this Devo specifically, we can recall all the times we were without and He gave. Maybe we were without a job and He provided. Perhaps we were without a car and one became available. Maybe we were without hope and then a song reminded us to believe. Being without is something our kids will face over and over again in this world. They will be lonely, without friends. They will be without direction and wandering. They might be without mercy when they feel like they've failed, and they need to know the story of how God gave, He rained down, and He led us to higher ground. I recall thinking we'd never be able to help our kids afford a car, go to college, or anything that was expensive. But they drove, they went, and they're on the other side of that big sea I thought we'd never cross. I must tell even my grown kids of that provision of how God gave when we were in need, so that they will trust Him with needs of their own when they have their own kids. God provides. They need to know, so they trust and remain faithful when they're in need. It's that simple. Tell them that God is the provider.